Hi, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
Welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. It's week 98 of the 2 weeks to flatten the curve lockdown. And we are back from very free Ireland to, I don't know if it's not kind of free California, by the way. Magda now is going to start shaking her head to that. But I have to say, Magda, just so you know, we're only back about 24 hours. But we were not asked for a passport yet. Correct, Phelim?
A COVID passport?
No.
But we haven't been indoors.
Oh
yeah, we did. No, we went indoors last night.
Yes, we did.
To a restaurant.
Yes, and they didn't
which will
ask
remain nameless. But I think they're supposed to ask, you know.
But the biggest shock, can I just say, of returning to the United States of America, my biggest shock of coming back here, is yesterday we got back and we went to get some groceries, right? And, you know, I obviously have heard, and it's really, you know, until it happens to you, you don't get it, right? So we were in Ireland where I don't think inflation is as bad as it is here. Kind of amazing to say.
Yes.
But I went to Trader Joe's. Phelim has a real problem with Trader Joe's.
Well,
We're not even getting into your problem with Trader Joe's, Phelim. I just want to make this one small point here. You
Hold
have
on.
an irrational problem with Trader Joe's.
Why do you get to make your small point here? Which, by the way, we all know will not be a small point. We'll
it's
go
a
on.
very small point.
No, it's not a small point. It's going to go on and on and on. And then I'm just supposed to take it and move on into the next... No. And by the way, this is the teaser section.
Well, I haven't got into the teasers at all, Phelim.
Yes.
I just want to deal with this one issue that happened since we came back.
You know, the problem with teasers
The
problem with this is that anyone who's not interested in Trader Joe's and the story you're about to tell
everyone's
will
gonna be
immediately have
interested in
switched
this.
off.
Trader Joe's. Can I just say...
Yes, tell us.
I actually am embarrassed,
Trader Joe's.
I'm actually embarrassed to say this now. I actually really genuinely am embarrassed to say this. I paid 79 cents for one onion. I actually bought two. They're both gone already, by the way. They have been consumed. 79 cents for an onion. And by the way, these aren't even big onions. They charge the same amount for a pair. So, I mean, I'm actually... the funny thing is, and you asked me, Phelim, how much of an increase that is. I don't know how much I paid the last time I paid for an onion. And the reason why I don't is because you never mark in your head how much it cost.
Because who knows how much an onion costs because they're so cheap. There was a family back home in Northern Ireland, particularly hungry in many ways, and they lived on onions because they were so cheap. So
turnip is cheap too. But I don't even know how much turnip is. But by the way, can I just say 79 cents for one onion? This is a real this is a complete drama. This is a terrible thing. This is shocking for people.
Well, you know what they say, Anne.
People have to feed people. Yes. To feed families.
But you know what they say. You know the difference between a recession and a depression.
Go on.
A recession is when your neighbour loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job. So there was no inflation in America. We talked about inflation, but it wasn't a crisis. It wasn't a drama.
Until it happened to my onions.
Until it was Trader Joe's onions. And then it becomes something we need to throw out the rules of teasers.
Okay.
Throw out the rules of teasers to interrupt the teasers.
All right, Phelim.
No, I want to say this. I mean, can you imagine what's going to happen when she goes to Costco?
I haven't been to Costco yet.
She hasn't been to Costco yet. Like we're good. The whole program next week is going to be a list of Costco vegetables and how much they cost.
Well, also
and how much
the other
they
thing
used
that
to
I'm
cost.
worried about is going to Costco and finding empty shelves. That'll be very disturbing. All right, Phelim, tell me about what
else is on the show today.
What else is on the show today?
Oh,
Phelim?
I'm glad you asked, Anne. I'm glad you asked. By the way, one half of this podcast believes that this inflation that discourages people from going to Trader Joe's is a national tragedy. The other half of the podcast believes that inflation that discourages people from Trader Joe's is one of the few bright spots of rising prices.
Can I just say the Trader Joe's that we have in our area in Marina Del Rey is actually it's actually a Trader Joe's on the marina. It has a view of the marina. It's an incredibly nice Trader Joe's.
Yeah, but standing outside Trader Joe's is even nicer. It's a better view.
Okay, moving on, Phelim. I don't know. Phelim has a really irrational problem with Trader Joe's. I think we need to move on from that. It is irrational, Phelim.
No, sorry. I believe people's love of Trader Joe's is irrational.
Fair enough. Okay, moving on. Tell us about Republicans being terrible
politicians. They're terrible politicians. Hunter Biden's company and bank were subpoenaed by a grand jury at the Trump set up by the Trump Department of Justice before the last election, and no one knew. It's just shocking how bad.
You thought they should have leaked that to the press.
These are the trailers, Anne. These are the teasers.
Sorry. Okay, all right.
We have to tease people. See, the thing about teasers is people get teased and go, "Oh, I'd like to know more about that. I better not go and make a cup of tea. I better sit and listen."
All right, Phil.
And our advertisers, ZipRecruiter, you know what ZipRecruiter is, and Simply Safe. They go, "Oh my God, all these people listen so long to your podcast. We have to give you lots of money."
That's the dream anyway. That and winning the lottery. Okay, go on ahead, Phelim. Who's the guest today that you're speaking to later?
Heather MacDonald, our old friend Heather MacDonald. We're going to talk about the terrible damage that the diversity drive is doing to this country. And as she says during the interview, when you hear a company or a university say we're introducing diversity, that means they're ending meritocracy, and it's a race to the bottom.
Watch out, and it's coming for you. Yeah.
Yes.
And the latest news from the front lines of wokery.
Yes.
And the latest from Ireland. When big government fails, what we need is more big government, apparently.
That's what people believe. Oh yeah, and
that's all right.
And look,
Yes.
there's in the teasers.
Okay,
I think
what
about Trader Joe's
All right.
that we were supposed to talk about in the teasers, not at the beginning.
And I want to say thank you to everyone who sent in great suggestions for what I should do with the lobsters. Magda was very amused by the photograph of me with the 2 frozen lobsters on the Highlands of Ireland. And we have kind of a non-recipe for the lobsters, but I really do appreciate everyone writing in, and we will bring you that recipe at the end, and Phelim's valiant effort to take the shell off the lobster. By the way, I think a thing to say, you know, the way sometimes you work out, you get to a certain age and you work things out about yourself. Like, I've got to a certain age where I've worked out that I don't like skiing because of putting on all the clothes and remembering things, and it just being a complete hassle. And in the same way, I have to say, I'm not keen on food that is a massive hassle to get to the food. So lobster needs to be undressed for me to like it. Do you like the way I said that, Phelim? Or perhaps it's the fact that we didn't have the right implements. Anyway, we're coming to that. Yes. Tell us more about Hunter Biden.
Yeah, well, Hunter Biden, it has just emerged, and this is by Miranda Devine in the New York Post,
our friend
that
Miranda.
in 2019, JP Morgan Chase was subpoenaed over Hunter Biden's business deals in China. They were obviously his banker or provided credit or whatever.
This is by the Trump DOJ, right?
The Trump DOJ. And this is like 17 months before the election, and we're only finding out about that now, that the president's son, who got on Air Force One or Air Force Two to go to China with Joe Biden and used that entree to make all these deals in China, that was then the subject of a grand jury investigation, and we're only hearing about that now. You know, I honestly think many Republicans didn't want Trump, and many people in the Trump White House didn't want Trump to win again. Because that can be the only explanation as to why they didn't focus on Joe Biden. They didn't, and their establishment, they love Joe Biden, and therefore they didn't want to bring him down full stop, and bring him down by attacking his corrupt son Hunter and the corruption that surrounded Joe as a result of that. That is the end of the story.
So we're going over now to an interview Phelim did earlier with Heather MacDonald, our friend Heather MacDonald.
Yes, you'll love this interview, and in it, Heather very quickly takes me to task for and I agree with her actually. I still think it's a point worth making, but she's right. It's a trap that you don't want to fall into. The question I put, and let's hear that, and it'll be interesting in your opinion about. The 2 different opinions about that question. So we're now joined by our friend Heather MacDonald. We've known Heather a long time. Just to anyone who doesn't know Heather, she's a fellow of the Manhattan Institute, a contributing editor at City Journal, New York Times bestseller, author for many times actually, and she's also a recipient of the 2005 Bradley Prize. We've known Heather for a long time, particularly around our verbatim play Ferguson, where her mild-mannered contribution to the debate provoked an actor to say he wasn't going to turn up to the next day's show, and I mean mild-mannered. She's I think the inventor of the phrase the Ferguson effect, and now she's talking about. We asked her on today to talk about, as she talks about the diversity delusion, about our most recent book, how race and gender pandering corrupt the university and undermine our culture. And she argues that America, the belief that America is endemically racist and sexist, creates perpetual victims and a nation of narrowed minds primed for grievances that is destroying our country. I think that the diversity delusion is a sort of a cousin of the Ferguson myth, and the idea that there are hordes of cops out there waiting to execute Black or Hispanic people is sort of also part of this idea that America is endemically racist and sexist, and therefore they're perpetual victims. So welcome to the show, Heather.
Well, Phelim, thank you so much, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm just stunned by the fact that we are living increasingly these public performances, these public fictions that we try to body forth the left-wing narrative, whether it's encircling the Capitol for months and months with barbed wire and bollards and fencing because the white supremacist attack on government, is going to happen any minute, pretending that the ongoing brutal, callous, sadistic attacks on elderly Asians is because of white supremacists when we know it's absolutely disproportionately Black. The idea that the police are the biggest threat facing Black people today, which is utterly ludicrous. Last year, the police fatally shot 4 allegedly unarmed Blacks, 4 out of a population of about 44 million. That is negligible. Meanwhile, there were over 10,000 Blacks who were killed overwhelmingly by other Black criminals. So we find ourselves in a situation today where the elites are simply determined to do whatever it takes to try and put flesh on the bones of what is a completely delusional version of reality. And the fundamental idea that is driving most of these fictional narratives is that racism is the reason behind any ongoing racial disparities in our country. Racism is the defining characteristic of America today, none of which is borne out by the facts.
Yeah, for me, the Ferguson myth and the myth of diversity, as you say, damages, and how said damages the right people are supposed to help, but it definitely helps one group of people. It's highly lucrative for those who are pushing these myths. Ibram X Kendi, he gets paid $40,000 for and plus a stipend for travel, flights, and meals for going to give speeches about how America is endemically racist against people like him. And also it's not as if it's a speech and he wants the world to know it. He goes and gives this speech, and he was at a recent event at a university, and they recorded it and put it up on the server. And boy, did he jump to get it taken down. So this is not about helping people. This is about helping Dr. Ibram X Kendi. So, in your view, from your studying, how much damage is CRT and the equity myth? How much damage is that causing?
Well, before I address your question about what's the damage being done, Phelim, let me take exception a little bit to the way you phrased the Kendi phenomenon, which is to say that, well, what's really driving this is just self-interest and, these people are cleaning up like bandits. That may be true, but I think that reflex that comes from conservatives, and maybe liberals lodge it against conservatives as well, to say, well, it's really all about money. I think that is too superficial and doesn't really take into account that these ideas are powerful on their own. They are sincerely believed in. Some ideas take hold, others do not. And to think that you've done enough by just pointing out that, well, people are getting rich off of this doesn't adequately combat the deceptions. And I think Kendi actually believes this, and a lot of other people who are not making 40,000 in speakers fees also believe it. So we have to take that on. Also, you said it's not about helping people, it's to make money. That implicitly assumes that anything in the America is racist conceit could possibly help people. It does not. It is completely inimical, and that returns to your actual question, Phelim, which is, what is the damage being done? The damage being done to our institutions is incalculable. There is not a single meritocratic institution today, whether it's in the STEM fields, in law, in business and government, that is not being dragged down into mediocrity in the name of diversity. It's particularly worrisome in the STEM fields because we are saying that it is more important to have diverse labs and diverse faculties in medical schools than it is to hire the best scientists and the best medical researchers. And I will tell you this, Phelim, here's what your audience needs to know. You can have diversity or you can have meritocracy. You cannot have both. Any institution that is talking about diversity is putting you on informal, implicit sotto voce notice that it is discarding meritocracy. The reason is because the academic skills gap between Blacks and Hispanics on the one hand and whites and Asians on the other is so vast that if you are going to go about engineering racial proportionality, it means you're going to have to radically lower your standards. And that is a recipe for civilizational decline.
Yeah, there's so much there in that answer. And I just want to come back and say, actually, I agree with your criticism of my position or what I put towards you, in the sense, I mean, people have always said this, people who push the climate change idea, they've all been bought off, and I always said our journalists are corrupt because their income depends. Look, if people were corrupt, then why doesn't the right just pay more money to them? Right? So and also, I suppose, from the left, if you think I'm corrupt, why don't you buy me off, and I'll become a prominent turncoat on so they don't actually believe. You're correct in that respect. Now, I would say, I wonder about Ibram X. Kendi. I mean, really believing, really, I don't know how deep his belief or his belief in what he's saying is, in the sense that what I meant about the speech was that if he was a true evangelist, if he was truly motivated, I mean, I would never ever dream of taking a speech of mine or a point of mine down from a server, because I want the widest audience as possible. In fact, I want people to accidentally come across our stuff so that we're not talking to an echo chamber. So when you force someone to take down what you've said, to me, that maybe it's a complex question, but to me that sounds like that person isn't motivated by a firm belief in what they're saying. There's something else going on. But I mean,
I think it can be both. I kind of, frankly, I have, when I was doing a lot of college speaking, I would sometimes reuse some core ideas from my speeches. And in that situation, if you are going to use material again, you don't necessarily want it out there. And it is asking a lot of a speaker to come up with a new speech every single time he speaks. I guess Jordan Peterson does that by ad-libbing, but most of us don't. So in any case, I agree with you, but I still think, as to the question, does he really believe this? Obviously, none of us can reach into somebody's heart, but I think these people absolutely do believe it. I think
actually we're arguing. Yeah, I mean, yes, funny. We're arguing, but we're probably getting distracted here, because the reality is there are tens of millions of people, and by the way, tens of millions of people who are not making money. There are tens of millions of people out in the streets here who believe that, and they're the most important people. Actually, is that this is a widespread belief, and it's very damaging for us, but it's very damaging for the people who believe it. And as you say, when an organization, and that's a very important point, when they say we're now becoming a diverse organization, that they're not becoming a meritocratic organization. Those two ideas they cannot live together. And it's going to, and China is laughing at us, Russia is laughing at us, because they're not concerned with diversity. They're concerned with meritocracy and using the full force of the state, not to enforce diversity, but to enforce meritocracy and making sure that their people are the best on the planet.
If a viewer sort of wants a key to understanding these odd changes that are going on in our world today, whether it's, prosecutors not willing to prosecute people for shoplifting and mass theft and resisting arrest and gun possession, or California schools deciding they're not going to teach algebra or, you know, have gifted and talented programs. Those are being decimated across the country. You know, absolute quotas in who gets Emmy awards or Grammys or Oscars, if any of those still exist. The key to everything you're seeing in our world today is disparate impact. Everything is being unwound because every single meritocratic standard, whether it's an academic standard or a behavioral standard like obeying the law, they all sadly have a disparate impact on Blacks. And so the reason that George Gascon there in LA is not enforcing a bunch of laws, or Alvin Bragg here in New York City is not enforcing laws, or Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, or Kim Fox in Chicago, or Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, the one reason, the only reason they've decided that they're not going to enforce the law is they'll put it in the name of racial justice, which translates to, it means that we prosecute too many Blacks and we don't want to do that. So they've decided they'd rather have criminals go free than have a disparate impact on Blacks. That's why we're getting rid of gifted and talented programs, because not enough Blacks qualify on their own. So we've decided, as you say, China is cultivating its math talent with a fanatical zeal. It is finding its best mathematical minds and pushing them ahead at warp speed. We are holding everybody back. We're saying we're not going to give you advanced math instruction because we don't like the racial mix in the classrooms. So disparate impact, and we'll have a book coming out on this next year, is what is behind the entire unwinding of our civilizational standards. And we have got to, as conservatives, offer a different explanation for why we don't have full racial proportionality across every institution. It's not racism, it's because of the behavior and academic skills gaps.
Yeah, you talked about civilization there, just to get back to the bit of civilization that I would be most familiar with. You talked about the Oscars, and when they wanted to...
have we come to that? Okay.
Yes.
Probably so.
Yeah, civilization and the Oscars probably don't match up. But no, it's something I have some knowledge of. When they widened the base of the Academy, you know, we've made several documentaries. Some of them have been theatrically released, which is very difficult for a documentary. And when they talked about widening the base of the Academy to because there'd be no more Oscars so wide, I looked at who they were inviting into, and this is, you know, you could say it's personal animosity because I wasn't invited, but I looked at the people they were letting into the documentary wing of the Academy, and I swear they had created or were involved in documentaries that I had never ever heard of, that had not been released, were not, and this is pre-streaming almost, that were not available anywhere. To me, they hadn't got even a theatrical release, and they now were denigrating, if you can do that, the base of the Academy, just because, as you say, and I think Hollywood probably has one of the better, it has less disparate impact, I think, than other parts of America. I think the entertainment industry has been one of the places where people of color have risen to the top consistently. So as you say, disparate impact is you talk there about behavior. What are the two reasons that you say conservatives, or the two answers that conservatives must have to tackle these allegations?
Well, look at crime. You know, the reason we talk about this term mass incarceration, which was something the left generated maybe 10, 15 years ago, the only reason we're concerned with alleged mass incarceration in the United States is because Blacks are disproportionately in prison. They're about a third of the nation's prison population, which includes state and federal, though they're about 13% of the population. So they're overrepresented in prison by a factor of 2 or 3. And so the only allowable explanation for that is the criminal justice system must be racist. You know, the cops are, we have the driving while black phenomenon in the 90s, racial profiling, stop, question, and frisk is racist, prosecutors are racist. No, the reason that we have blacks in prison is because they commit crimes at astronomically higher rates. The bodies don't lie. Blacks die of homicide between the ages of 10 and 33 at 13 times the rate of whites. 13 times. The bodies do not lie. And who is killing those blacks? Not the police, not whites, but other blacks. Blacks commit homicide at about 11 to 13 times the rate of whites. Juveniles between the ages of 14 and 17, black male juveniles commit gun homicide at 10 times the rate of white and Hispanic male juveniles combined. So you cannot enforce the law given those types of disparities without having a disparate impact on blacks. The drive-by shootings, the insane homicide increase that we saw in 2020, 2021, these just outrageous drive-by shootings where kids are being shot in their backyards, 1-year-olds shot in their car, in their heads, at barbecues, in their beds, by often teenagers that are wildly spraying gunfire across sidewalks without the slightest concern. America turns its eyes away from that kind of behavior. It cannot deal with the breakdown of culture in the inner city. Things are very bad. The underclass ideology, the oppositional ideology, the pathologies of child rearing are very bad. That's not to say this is universal. There are thousands of hardworking, law-abiding, bourgeois blacks who want to succeed, who believe in the American way, who believe in property rights and respect for others, and they are crushed by this crime. But on average, there is a real problem there, and we don't want to talk about it, and instead we blame the messenger, we blame the cops and say, oh, they must be racist for locking away too many black criminals. No, that's just not the case. The crime is real.
You can see why people don't want to talk about this, because, as you say, it comes back to culture, a culture. And when you say the culture of child rearing, and tell me more about that.
What type of family has raised a child, a 15-year-old who goes out and just shoots at people repeatedly, you know, that is dropping out of school, that is throwing his gang signs on the web, showing off his money, but that is engaged in these absolutely savage drive-by shootings. And I'm sorry to say it, but violent street crime, the robberies, the drive-by shootings in this country today are almost exclusively committed by blacks and Hispanics. In New York City, for example, blacks and Hispanics commit 98% of all shootings in the city. Whites, even though they're the majority, the plurality, largest plurality population, commit less than 2% of all shootings. And that those disparities are true in every American city. So you have a failure. Fathers don't know how to father. They're not, you know, they're not, certainly not marrying the mothers of their children. You have something that the sociologists refer to as multi-partner fertility, where any given mother has children by several different fathers and any given male has children by several different mothers. It's utterly chaos. And, you know, one reads often about, say, a 7-year-old who's shot at 2 a.m. at night, having been standing on a corner, maybe with her mother. Now, does that mother not understand that you don't have your 7-year-old, and this happens in Chicago repeatedly, out with you at 2 a.m.? A lot of these kids who are getting shot would have been okay if they'd been at home in bed, but they're not. The households are chaos. I've done ride-alongs in Dorchester and Roxbury, in Boston, and the kids are, you know, left. The mother's strung out on crack. The kids have no upbringing. It is very bad. The family breakdown is very, very bad. And we were sort of looking at it in the 1990s in this country with regards to welfare reform and talking about how do we reform underclass culture. We're putting in a work requirement into welfare, get rid of what was euphemistically referred to as multi-generational poverty, which is really more about moral poverty. And since then, the curtain has been drawn tightly shut and nobody wants to talk about it any longer.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, there was a lot of talk about this, even from the Moynihan report through the 80s and even into the early 90s. No one's talking about that now, and
Right.
the media, have a lot to answer for here. I mean, okay, that's what we're talking about now is a slightly complex idea, right? Slightly, it's not hugely complex, but you mentioned it, I think, at the beginning about the attacks on elderly Asians in New York. We have video of those, a lot of those attacks on Asian people in New York, and
the Bay Area too,
and the Bay Area, correct? Yeah, and also we have video of the attacks on Orthodox Jews in New York, and the media will literally show you video after video after video of young Black men attacking Orthodox Jews and Asians, and then tell you it's a white supremacy problem or an intolerancy problem. That to me,
we are living this lie, and that's why the media put out a cry of elation at the Atlanta spa shootings, because for once they had a white guy, but and they portrayed it as white supremacist hate crime. It was not. He was religiously tormented by his sexual urgings and porn consumption and going to brothels and so-called massage parlors, but they turned it into white supremacy because they finally wanted a body that would give reality to this fiction. And you talk about the videos. What about the videos of all the mass lootings? It's exclusively Black, and nobody's talking about that either.
Yeah, but, I suppose you could, the mass lootings, I think, are slightly different because they're claiming a racial element to the attacks on the Asians and Orthodox Jews. You look at, okay, well, it's white supremacy, it's hate, and you look at it and you go, I think there's a common denominator. I mean, I often look at these people and say, what did you go into journalism for, right? Why did you go into journalism? If your journalism consists of looking at the truth and then looking at people and telling them that does not exist, to me, it's sad. It's sad for them, but it's very sad for America that's how the media are treating people. So when can we expect your book to come out then?
I hope next year.
It's never been more urgently needed. I mean, apart from calling out people, you said we need a new way of talking about this. How can we talk about this, and how can we get that new way of talking out to the mass public?
Well, honesty. You talk about honesty. I mean, it is really perplexing with the media. But again, I would say I think they believe it. I think they're conscious, able to have cognitive dissonance or something, where a lot of these young reporters have come out of universities and it's been so drummed into them that America's racist that they just have one cognitive gyration after another to explain away the facts that are right before their eyes. But it is truly bizarre. So how do we talk about it? We breach taboos and give the facts about Black crime or the academic skills gap, the fact that the average Black 12th grader reads at the level of the average white 8th grader. Given that, how is it possible, conceivable, that absent racism, and the math skills are just as disparate, absent racism, Google should be 13% Black. The number of PhDs in electrical engineering and computer science and nanotechnology who are Black that graduate each year is in total, several dozen nationwide. That's not enough to seed every big tech company. And so we just have to keep putting the facts out there, because it is impossible to understate the degree to which Americans have been kept in complete ignorance, and they are very well-meaning at this point, and I think they actually do believe that crime is equally spread throughout the community, you know, or there isn't an academic skills gap. What frustrates me is that teachers do not talk about the chaos in their classroom. It's like they've taken a pact of silence.
Yes.
Inner city teachers see things that, again, America is just clueless about, as far as the violence in their class, the lack of attention, the lack of doing homework, of taking textbooks home, the premature sexuality, and nobody knows this. And so, you know, when the Obama administration says, well, the only reason that Blacks are disciplined in schools more is because of teacher racism, which is preposterous. Teachers are the most left-wing profession in the country. Nobody pushes back against that. And the teachers are weirdly continue the pact of silence.
Yeah. You talked about, though, breaching taboos and, you know, and trying to tell people, but, you know, you've famously used to quote a study from the University of Michigan, I think it was, about police stopping, how police did not stop young Black men. Was that it? And quoted it, I think, in a Wall Street Journal op-ed. And the response from the academics who had found this, that you can tell me what they found, but their response was not what you would think when you quoted it in the Wall Street Journal. Tell us about that.
Yes, this was a 2019 study by a lead author at the University of Michigan, Joseph Cesario, who looked at fatal police shootings. And it's true that the police on average shoot about 1,000 people a year. About 50% of the people the police shoot are white, and about 25% are Black. Now that Black ratio of about 25%, that goes between 23, 27 year to year, is more than the Black population, which is 13%. So the left looks at that and says, you see, the police are racist. That's the wrong benchmark. The other thing to take away from our talk today, fellow, one is disparate impact. The other is benchmark problem. You got to benchmark police activity, whether it's arrests or stops or, yes, shootings, against crime. And these Cesario and his co-authors found that when you take violent crime into account, what appears to be about a 2.5 times greater chance of Blacks being fatally shot by the police flips entirely. That it's whites who are more likely to be shot once you take in homicide rates and other violent crime rates, and that there's no evidence that the race of officers or race of suspects is what drives shootings. So I cited this in a 2020 Wall Street Journal op-ed after the George Floyd killing and riots. And the Wall Street Journal's reporters rose up in rebellion and at the opinion page for publishing me. And the authors got so much flack from the fact that I had cited them that they withdrew their study. Fortunately, they kept up another one from 2018 that had reached the identical conclusion. So that's still out there if you want to find it.
Yeah, but how can you, I mean, are you allowed, I suppose you can withdraw. What excuse did they give for withdrawing a study that they that found something, you know, as you say, an inconvenient truth that breached a taboo?
They just didn't like the way it was being used. If I was citing it, that somehow that was not what they were hoping for. They claimed that I didn't cite it appropriately. They never said in what way I didn't. I cited it literally verbatim. I simply republished their findings. But they said, well, it's being used in ways we didn't intend, so we're withdrawing it. But yes, you're right. I mean, this is not how academics or the pursuit of knowledge is supposed to work.
It's not. You
build things, and if you think things are wrong, you contribute to the debate. You do not even silence yourself.
Yeah. That's what they said. I mean, that's what you say, teachers are silencing themselves, and now we've got academics silencing themselves, because the reality of what they find, or the reality of what teachers find every day in the classroom, is not the narrative that's out there. And it takes real courage to go against that, and they're not prepared to do that. Well, Heather, thank you very much. We're looking forward to your book when it comes out, and please keep breaching the taboos. It's much needed, and we'll hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, well, you've got the creative impulse behind it. You've got ways to really make it. I talked about these sort of fake theater projects and dramas that we're all forced to live and enact, but you actually put the theater out there that get people to realize these fictions. So good for you. And I look forward to your
thank you.
next project.
Thank you. No, I mean, actually, funny, that's another, I think what really got them upset about Ferguson was, I was giving voice to African-American voices that were going against the narrative. For people who don't know it, Ferguson was the verbatim play using the grand jury testimony about the Michael Brown shooting. So it was eyewitness accounts, and 9 of the actors walked out during rehearsals. In the New York performance, Heather did a Q&A, and as you can see from Heather here, she's quite mild-mannered and quite sort of not one of the things I like about the way you deliver your points is it's very quiet and very calm and not emotional in the slightest, but devastating to that narrative. And it was so devastating that the actor, one of the actors, said he next day wasn't going to turn up in the next performance, even though another actor's parents had driven 3 hours to see her in the play. He eventually came in 15 minutes before the end and tried to make a speech at the end, which all ended in disaster. But I think they didn't like people being given a voice who were against the narrative, and they certainly didn't like it in the theater, which is their place where they can get to tell their stories. And I was so glad to be able to go there and tell the truth in their place and annoy them for doing so. By doing so,
every little bit counts. It really does.
Oh, thank you so much, and we'll hopefully talk to you again, Heather.
Thank you, Philip.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, she's great. Heather is really wonderful.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the book, and we're going to have her on. She should have her own podcast. I wonder, does she have a? I don't think she has a podcast.
She didn't mention podcast.
She should have a podcast.
She's really amazing.
Yeah.
She's great, and as you say, she has this great way of dealing with these issues that quite a lot of people get very emotive about, and she's just really calm and just deals with facts and deals with statistics and deals with an academic approach to these issues, which of course is incredibly unpopular now.
Yes.
A lot of you will have noticed. We've got a lot in the program today, but we just wanted to mention the Joe Rogan controversy that's been blowing up over at Spotify.
Yep.
And obviously massive loss to Spotify. Neil Young and Joni Mitchell. I mean, every 24-year-old is going, who? Who's that now?
Every 44-year-old, I think.
Yeah, but basically,
I think you're showing your age there. Actually, I think every 44-year-old, Joni Mitchell.
Well, actually, Joni Mitchell is before my time. Can I just say?
1970s,
See me, not that old, Just mentioning. So Neil Young and Joni Mitchell have pulled their music off Spotify because they are so disgusted with the fact that Joe Rogan is still on Spotify and that he was allowed to speak to Dr. Malone and that he was allowed to speak to Dr. McCullough and all these different characters who are basically challenging the orthodoxies. What's happened is he's interviewing people who challenge the orthodoxies around COVID and ask questions that are worth hearing. And I mean, these are people, by the way, those two guys, those two doctors. I mean, read their CVs. These are pretty impressive.
Well, read their CVs. Actually, we remember we tried to listen to the Joe Rogan podcast.
Very hard.
And it was Dr. Malone just reading his CV for the first half hour, and I just fell asleep and stopped listening. Right. But one thing I would say, I see Joe Rogan. I haven't read the speech in full. He's come out now and kind of
apologized. The Wall Street Journal. Well, a lot of people, the Wall Street Journal are describing it as an apology.
Yeah, but he said, "I wish I'd given more attention to the other side." No,
and he is going to give attention.
Yeah,
to
but the problem is, every piece of mainstream establishment media has been pushing the other line all along. So it's not your job, Joe, to continue pushing what the establishment, what the government line is. Your job was to provide an alternative, which you did, and by the way, which was very popular. So
Joe Rogan, for those of you who don't know, has a $100 million deal with Spotify to provide content, and he is probably the biggest. I think, without doubt, the biggest podcaster on the planet Earth. But the reason I bring this story and mention it just to bring it to a conscious level, I just thought this was so fabulous, right? So Joni Mitchell, incredibly principled, obviously, and Neil Young, incredibly principled, obviously, have said their music can no longer be on this platform. Harry and Meghan are, and I love this, they are really concerned about this Joe Rogan situation, extremely concerned.
That's what they-
Now, concerned is
So
not
they're, so
pulling
they've
their
pulled their content. Well, actually,
No, they
it
haven't
wouldn't
pulled
be
their
different.
content.
The problem is,
The problem with them pulling their content is and
no
by the
one
way,
would notice.
No one would know. Well, first of all, I think it's worth saying that they have a deal. By the way, this is a sweetheart of a deal. They got a deal with Spotify worth $25 million. $25 million to provide podcast content to Spotify. I don't think either of them are singers. So basically, it was going to be podcast content. So they're very concerned about Joe Rogan. I would say they're very concerned because Joe Rogan is so popular. But here's what they're not going to do. They're not pulling their content, and they're not going to give up the contract.
But the thing about their content is they were supposed to produce all this content for their $25 million, as you would be expected. However, since they signed the deal a few years ago,
correct,
all they have produced is one holiday special podcast, which was published or released on December 2020, and was basically him and her, Harry and Meghan.
It's a holiday special.
Harry and Meghan talking about Christmas. I think we heard a little bit from one of their children, who they really want to protect their privacy, but they're just going to put them on a podcast. And then they had James Corden and Elton John on talking nonsense, and that was the whole thing. So their friends phoning in, and that was it.
So 2 years into their contract, they've produced one podcast.
And it's so bad that Spotify have now advertised for people basically to take over their podcast production and produce some of this much vaunted content.
Can I just say, I'm really curious about a deal that you would make with anyone where you would give them $25 million and you wouldn't have as part of the deal the necessity for the people on the other side of the deal to actually produce something.
It's quite an interesting one.
Well, by the way, and it's a similar deal if you think about it. It's a very similar deal to the Obama's deal with Netflix. They got a huge bunch of money, like a massive bunch of money. I don't know, 50 million, some crazy amount of money. And then they produced
74.
They produced one piece of content, which was a documentary about Michelle on her book tour.
Yeah.
A yawn fest, if ever there was a yawn fest.
In the defense of the Obamas, which is words I never thought I would hear saying, they have bought some other documentaries, a couple of other, one about a Chinese company building a factory in Minnesota or something, but they haven't. I don't think they've produced anything yet. They've bought other people's content, but they haven't produced anything. And the reason they haven't produced anything is because, you know what? It costs money to produce things, and you're never sure you'll get the money back, and it takes time.
And it's nice. It's nice to just take the money and run. I think you made that point, Phelim, recently, because we were talking about con people, and there were lots of them around, unfortunately.
Con men, con women.
And we were thinking, why would the people, because these con people are very, very clever. And our question was, why would a con person not just go ahead and make money legitimately?
Yeah.
And the truth is, it's a lot easier to just take the money and run, not to have to do the work.
Because if you produce in the entertainment industry, if you make a $2 million movie or a $2 million documentary, you're going to come out with 10 or 20% of that, which is fine, by the way. And you produce 2 or 3 movies a year, and it's But if you just run off of the 2 million,
just run with the money.
Just run off, or as in the Obamas, run off of the 74 million.
Nice.
It buys some nice waterfront properties.
Okay, moving on. I just wanted to bring this to a conscious level. This is incredible. So this is basically the state of wokery in 3 images. When you got these 3 images that I want to go through that have just happened recently. Some of them you'll have seen, and they're just it's kind of like a survey of where are we in the woke world. The first photograph you'll see here is of Disney's Minnie Mouse, who originally in 1928, that's what she looked like when she was first designed in 1928 with her lovely polka dot skirt on her. And she wore other clothes, by the way, in the subsequent 100 years.
Yes.
But her main outfit was this polka dot outfit, and very nice it was too. But no, Stella McCartney has come along and has created a sustainable blue pantsuit, as you can see.
Sustainable blue. How does it be sustainable?
She did this. This is basically what her big idea is for Minnie Mouse. Moving on from that, just take a look at this from Nike. I saw this ad on Twitter and I thought, do you know something? That's not real. I just thought, that's not a real ad. That's somebody's joke. Phelim, would you look at it for the first time there?
I'm just looking at it.
Now, can you tell me, what do you think you see there? Because I looked at that and I thought, well, I mean, I almost recognise that character there, because we have that character, about 1,000 of him, living in our neighbourhood. Right, Phelim?
Yeah, it's a vaguely homeless look.
A vaguely homeless kind of...
no, I'm looking at the image. It's a homeless look. It's also a kind of Russian babushka look with the scarf around
I think
the
it's
head.
kind of got a trans aspect to it. Is that a woman? Is that a skirt on that man?
That's the skirt on that man.
It's a very bizarre image. But anyway, that's a Nike ad apparently for the latest Tech Pack collection. I have actually still no idea what has been advertised here, but I have to say it did really shock me. And here's what Nike say in the ad, and I checked and make sure this is bold, versatile layers that are always ready, so you take changing temps in your stride.
Changing temperatures, yeah.
Changing temperatures in your stride. Okay, I'm going to leave that just there, but then the next image, my third in the survey of wokery, is Apple have now launched an emoji for a pregnant man. And that's just really, there's really not much to say there.
Yes.
Except for not much to say there.
Well, actually, can I just say something?
You can say something, Phelan.
Men cannot get pregnant.
Men cannot get
needs to be
pregnant.
said. There you go. I never thought.
Look at you. Look at you,
I never
Phelan.
thought when I entered this information business, when I thought I when I was studying journalism. Should I tell my journalism story?
Not today, perhaps. What's your journalism story?
They are.
Oh, not
I
today.
don't care if they are rape pairs.
No, I don't really do that today. But actually, it's one to.
So when this is that story. That story I won't tell it now. That story is about me being a student journalist and the echo of me being a student journalist. Something I wrote. One of my first piece of journalism has just reemerged 31 years later
in an opera.
In an opera,
moving
right?
on.
But when I entered journalism, I thought I'd be writing about many things.
This is
I never
Phelan
thought
leaving
I never thought that 31 years later, after entering journalism, I would be
explaining to people
that men cannot get pregnant, but they cannot get pregnant. So there you go. You heard it first here.
You heard it first here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just a few things.
You saw this story.
We're just back from Ireland. So I just
between us and all.
Yeah, there's a couple of stories I got in Ireland. Paul Dean, who's some beardy weirdy, who writes for the Business Post in Ireland. His headline is Paul Dean, energy crisis mustn't leave Ireland out in the cold. So basically, they've closed so many power plants in Ireland because they want to be carbon whatever, and we're going to be carbon neutral or carbon zero by 2050 or something, and it's in the law. They've closed so many power plants that they're really afraid that the electricity is going to go off, the power is going to go off this winter. So Paul Dean, energy crisis mustn't leave Ireland out in the cold. Well, maybe it is, but he says, as gas and electricity prices continue to rise sharply, the only solution is to move faster towards renewables. And this is a classic. Big government has destroyed. Yeah, but big government has destroyed something. So the answer to that is to have more big government. Maybe less government. Maybe let the market decide. Maybe have let many flowers bloom, and people. And you know what? You'll solve your energy problem. Don't be relying on Vladimir Putin for your gas supply, Europe. And you might find, why don't you frack yourself? There's plenty of fracking availability in Ireland. They banned it. There's oil and gas off the Irish coast. They've passed a law that they won't exploit it. And now they're worried about an energy crisis. Well, there you go. And it's very similar to the next story. Una Mullally, who's really, she's just the greatest intellectual in Ireland since never. Since Mrs. Brown on the BBC series. Let's have a look at Mrs. Brown there.
No, Phelan, people don't.
I just want to look at a picture. It's a man dressed as a woman, but there you go. But anyway, Una Mullally, she said, banning of bedsits set in train housing disaster. So a bedsit is basically a studio apartment.
What Americans call a studio.
Or it can be a one-bedroom apartment with a shared bathroom outside. It can be either of those. And of course, it's the lowest rung on the housing ladder, and she's complaining. Here's once upon a time, bedsits were banned. The ban was brought in under Section 6 of the Housing Standards Act 2009. At the time, there was pushback from landlords and others who said there were obviously issues with standards, but this cheap accommodation served a purpose. Now she's saying it's set in train, a housing disaster. All poor people have been cut out from a vital rung on the housing ladder, and it's really affected the most vulnerable. It's taken more money out of their wages than ever, because they have to now go to one-bedroom apartments, proper studio apartments, and but Una doesn't say in this 1,000 word piece on bedsits, who was pushing for the abolition of bedsits, and it was Una Mullally and people like her. So she now recognises the disaster, and now she wants more rules to overcome the disaster that she created.
That she created herself.
Well, you know what? I'd rather not take your advice on housing, Una, so thank you very much.
So when we went to Ireland, I think I told you this story the last time we arrived, and we have a lot of very nice friends, a lot of nice people in our lives over there, and somebody very kindly left us 2 lobsters that were already cooked in the freezer. And it did create a dilemma because we were thinking, what do we do with them? And it was too much for just the 2 of us and all this business. Anyway, we asked you, what should we do with them? And he said they were cooked already and frozen. And look at how nice they looked. Look at how well they looked there, actually. Just fine looking, 2 fine looking animals. Anyway, we decided we had to go.
Controversial. Is a lobster an animal, Magda? Yeah, I think it's
What else would it be? It's a crustacean.
Is that an animal?
Of course, they're all animals. We're all animals now, Philip.
That's it. We're all animals now.
We're all animals now. So,
True.
and actually, by the
apologise.
way, and I wanted to bring that story at some stage to everyone. I think there's a law now somewhere about lobsters because lobsters apparently feel pain, and I think in quite a number of places, and I think this is law in some places that you won't be able to cook them anymore because the only way to cook them is to cook them alive because otherwise it's super dangerous. So you have to plunge them into boiling water. Anyway, I didn't have to do any of that. So we asked you, what should we do? And lots of you wrote loads of replies to that. Thank you very, very much for all of that. I brought them up to Dublin and I let them defrost, and then look at Phelim trying to cut through. And I know some of you now are going to write and say he's making an awful job of it. But actually,
I'm an inexperienced lobster man. I'm from Tyrone, which is a landlocked county in Ireland. Right. There wasn't a big lobster industry there.
So basically, I think one of the big things to say is I think we definitely didn't have the right tools. But I do think if you haven't got the right tools, I do think a regular kitchen scissors is pretty good. So
I would disagree. I think you need good tools.
But no, I'm saying if you didn't have good tools. If you don't have good tools, I think a good kitchen scissors is not a bad thing to use. So you can see that Phelim did succeed in opening up the lobsters. And what we decided to do was basically treat the lobster like prawn and make a lobster cocktail. So we had Mary Rose sauce and very nice green leaves and some baby cherry tomatoes and some spring onions. You can see there the finished result. Really, really nice, very, very fresh. And we shared that with our hosts in Dublin, who were very kind to keep us. And I have to say, delicious. But I really have a problem with having to work that hard to eat my food. And I think this is something going forward. Yeah, I need my lobster undressed for me in advance. Not that it's something I have to worry about because I don't get lobster very often.
No.
But listen, that's it. We've come to the end of the show.
Thank you very much.
We are very grateful to you. As you know, we are still raising money to make sure that the My Son Hunter film gets to the massive audience it deserves to go to. We're still working on the edit of the film. It looks great. We are so excited, and we will be bringing you news as it happens. But right now you can go to mysonhunter.com, and give what you can because we do need this film to get to the largest audience. And you can imagine the opposition that originally existed against this story, that opposition still exists.
Oh, and it's getting worse.
It's getting worse.
As the election approaches, as the midterms approach, it's war on truth. So please help us get the truth out there. Go to mysonhunter.com. Go to mysonhunter.com and give what you can.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.